What's up guys, this is Heat, and in this video we're going to look at my hardcore Tempest sweep build called Sweepocalypse. I like to call Sweepocalypse the everyman's build because it's pretty straightforward to play, it doesn't really have complicated mechanics, it bypasses the messy transition phase because you can play it from the get-go, or at least at level 12 when you acquire Sweep, and it's extremely powerful at all levels of wealth and links. It also has solid clear speed and has no problem with endgame maps. The basic premise of this build is to use Sweep in the middle of large groups or on the outer edges of packs to decimate enemies quickly. Leap Slam in this case is used as a multi-purpose utility skill, one being a movement skill which allows for traveling quickly, dodging, and positioning, and the other use being to proc Fortify. For single target, it uses Heavy Strike for its stun utility and DPS. The build also capitalizes on its use of Vol Haste for a general increase in clear speed. In terms of gameplay flow, generally it goes something like this. You cast Blood Rage, you leap slam into a pack, sweep things into oblivion, leap to the next pack, sweep some more, cast Enduring Cry, occasionally use Heavy Strike against rares and bosses, activate Vol Haste to kill things even faster, repeat. One side note, Sweep by itself actually puts up strong numbers even for single target damage and is far more safe because its reach is quite far. Actually, it's far enough to put you out of the proximity of a mob's melee range. Of course, this is if you cannot stun with Heavy Strike. If you can, then you might as well use Heavy Strike. Defensively, this build uses Iron Reflexes and Grace for a huge armor boost. It also uses Endurance Charges for extra physical damage mitigation, it uses Fortify for extra all damage mitigation, and it uses Arctic Armor for even more physical mitigation and also fire damage mitigation. So to say the least, pretty solid defensively. When we look at numbers, we sit around 15,000 armor and 60% quote-unquote estimated physical damage mitigation without a Granite Flask. With a Granite Flask, we're looking around 28,000 armor and an estimated 74% physical damage mitigation. One thing to note is the numbers shown do not actually include the 6 endurance charges, which provide you an extra 24% physical damage mitigation. Offensively, we only use one damage aura, Herald of Ash, and it also runs 5 frenzy charges. So when we look at DPS numbers for Sweep, with a 469 DPS mace with 5 frenzy charges, we're looking about 42,000 DPS in a 6 link. Now in the 5 link, you're going to be looking at somewhere between 28 to 35,000 DPS, again depending on your weapon. So let's take a look at the skill tree. One thing to note is that you can play this build with either a duelist or a marauder. It doesn't really matter. In my opinion, it's a preference what class you choose to play it in. So as you can see here, I chose to go through the duelist part of the tree, picking up Master of the Arena, Bravery, Art of the Gladiator, which are very solid notables. But the reason I went through the duelist part of the tree is I wanted to get to Iron Reflexes. Along the way to getting to Iron Reflexes, you have to be as efficient as possible, and I think I constructed the tree in a way which I maximize all the skill points that I could use in this area. Picking passives like Wrecking Ball, Executioner, an extra gem slot, an extra endurance charge, an extra frenzy charge, Cloth and Chain, which is actually a very underrated passive in my opinion, and then ultimately picking up Iron Reflexes. Exiting the Marauder start area of the passive tree was pretty straightforward. I went through Butchery and then immediately made my way to Resolute Technique via picking up Barbarism. Now we want Resolute Technique because we're not crit based, so we want 100% accuracy. Now obviously because we're mace based, you want to pick up that mace wheel with all the DPS passives, but then I also went and picked up this jewel slot and this endurance charge. That endurance charge is especially good because if you pick it via that entryway, you also get life regeneration based on the number of endurance charges you have. Now what you're seeing here is more life and extra endurance charges, and then I also went and picked up Blunt Instrument, which I feel is kind of underrated because it provides both offensive and defensive utility. Now, if I were to complete this build, I would go through the life portion of the Templar tree, and then ultimately ending with picking up Amplify. When we look at things like jewels, you probably want something like increased maximum life, melee damage. I also experimented with chance to knock back on hit, which is actually pretty good with Sweep because Sweep attacks so fast that it procs very often. Other things that you want are probably like area damage works, also life leech, and then I also experimented with stun recovery as a defensive utility. So lastly, let's take a look at gear and links and see what link setups I used in each gear slot. In terms of weapon, obviously you want as much DPS as possible on your mace. In this instance, I have a mace with 469 DPS. When we look at the 5 link setup for my heavy strike, I have heavy strike, faster attacks, melee physical damage, added fire damage, and blood magic. Lastly, I have Arctic Armor as the 6th socket. So let's take a look at the helm. This is completely optional. You don't need to use this unique, but I thought it was pretty cool. It's pretty chic, right? So I went with increased duration, blood magic, Vol haste, and blood rage in this 4 link. This helm is also pretty sweet because it gives you movement speed mod on a piece that isn't generally available. So let's take a look at the 6 link setup for my sweep in this chest piece. So what I have is sweep, faster attacks, and then I have melee physical, which is very important because it's a more multiplier. Then I have multi-strike, and then I have added fire damage. And lastly, blood magic, because again, everything runs off blood magic. The glove slot is pretty interesting because you can actually roll offensive stats on gloves like flat fizz damage and increased attack speed. I chose to go with increased attack speed because they weren't as expensive, and it has some stats that were pretty good for this build. As you can see, I also rolled intelligence because some gems like Herald of Ash require intelligence. In the 4 link setup, I have Leap Slam, Fortify, faster attacks, and blood magic. Now, Leap Slam is primarily used to proc Fortify, and then also for positioning and moving quickly. When we take a look at the belt, ideally you want a Rustic Sash because the implicit physical damage, and then life and resistances. Other things that are nice are strength because it double dips on damage and life. In terms of boots, I don't have movement speed because there is movement speed on my helm, so you can actually seek boots with other stats and it won't cost you as much, which is a pretty nice thing. So what I have here linked is Enduring Cry to blood magic, and the only stipulation here is you can't have Grace and Herald of Ash linked to blood magic, so you can't have a 4 link in one of your slots, either like your helm, your boots, or your gloves. So you have to kind of get lucky to not roll a 4 link. When we take a look at jewelry, it's pretty basic. Obviously you want life and resistances, and then flat fizz damage for increased DPS on all your attacks. Same thing for an amulet. That amulet was kind of laxer, could have used an upgrade, but you're basically looking for the same thing. Life, resistances, and damage. And also, if you need dex to run something like Vol haste or faster attacks, you can also roll that on your jewelry. Pretty standard stuff for flasks here. I have 2 life seething flasks, I have a staunching flask, and I have a well-rolled granite flask. That concludes the build guide. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching.